In the dimly lit command room of the Galactic Concord Central Station, the light from the holographic map flickered like dying stars. Red dots spread relentlessly, swallowing the green specks that represented the last remaining star systems of the Concord. General Kale Vorin stood there, his emerald eyes glowing beneath his metallic gray skin, his hands gripping the armrests of the command chair until his knuckles turned pale. The war against the Vyran Empire had raged for over a decade, and with each passing day, the Concord lost another piece of territory, another planet, another shred of hope. His voice cut through the heavy air, deep and weary. "How much time do we have left?" Admiral Thrime, her slender frame and pale blue skin shimmering like glass, lifted her head from the control panel. The small fins along her spine quivered slightly, a rare sign of the tension she kept hidden. "At this rate, Vyran will reach the central ring in 3 months. We lost over half our fleet in the Clithra system last week. There's no miracle coming, Kale." Her tone was calm, but her large eyes, reflecting the hologram's light, betrayed a despair she tried to mask. Kale turned away, his gaze locked on the map. The Clithra system, once an impregnable space fortress, was now just rubble drifting in the void. The Vyran Empire, with its colossal warships and ferocious armies, outmatched the Concord not only in numbers but in sheer brutality. General Vyran Zorith, the Empire's leader, was a specter haunting every Concord commander. Kale had faced him once via hologram during a failed negotiation years ago. His golden eyes blazed like fire, his tattered membranous wings twitched, and his growling voice declared, "This galaxy will belong to Vyran, or there will be no galaxy left." Since then, Zorith had turned words into action, conquering system after system at a pace no one could have predicted. "We need a plan," Kale said, his voice sharp as a blade. "Not half-baked tactics or empty hopes. A real plan." He turned to Lyra Vey, the petite scientist of the Alara race, standing quietly by the secondary control panel. Her hair shimmered like fiber optics, her pale purple eyes darting over numbers and charts with dizzying speed. "Lyra, do you have anything?" Lyra looked up, her voice soft but resolute. "We've tried everything, General. Direct assaults, ambushes, outer defenses. Vyran adapts faster than we can anticipate. Their technology isn't superior, but the way they use it, it's as if they know our every move beforehand." She paused, her fingers sliding across the hologram screen, zooming in on a region near the Concord's border. "But I've noticed something odd. For the past 3 years, the humans, those who've only sent food and supplies, have increased their communication with our observation posts. They're watching, but they haven't acted." Kale frowned. Humans, a mysterious race from a distant planet called Earth. They had joined the Concord as observers over a decade ago. They never fought, never sent warships, only provided logistics with uncanny efficiency. Their transport ships always arrived just in time, carrying food, fuel, and sometimes medical equipment the Concord hadn't requested but desperately needed. Kale had thought them timid, or perhaps indifferent to the galaxy's fate. But now, as Lyra mentioned them, a flicker of unease stirred within him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice lowering. "What are they waiting for?" Before Lyra could answer, a communications officer burst into the room, his face pale, his hands trembling as he held up a transmission device. "General, news just came from the Eastern Rim. The humans, they've sent an official message through the military channel." He swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "They're declaring their entry into the fight. Right now." The command room fell silent. Kale felt his heart pound in his chest. Thrime turned, her eyes widening. "Entering the fight?" she repeated, her tone thick with disbelief. "After all this time? They don't even have a significant fleet in the region. What kind of joke is this?" Kale didn't respond immediately. He stepped to the central console, ordering, "Activate the main screen. I want to see that message." The officer scrambled to comply, and a holographic image appeared in the room's center. It was a human, male, middle-aged, with short brown hair streaked with gray, his steel-gray eyes cold and unyielding. He wore a dark uniform, plain and unadorned, yet exuded an aura that made Kale instinctively straighten. I am Colonel Elias Hart, representing humanity's armed forces. The man's voice rang out, deep and clear, devoid of emotion. As of this moment, we are officially joining the conflict between the Galactic Concord and the Vyran Empire. Our fleet has been deployed to the Nuruth system, where Vyran forces are concentrated. We request the Concord's cooperation to optimize campaign efficiency. Message ends. The image vanished, leaving a heavy silence. Kale blinked, processing what he'd heard. The Nuruth system, one of Vyran's strongest bastions, guarded by dozens of warships and a network of space fortresses. The Concord had lost thousands of soldiers just to reach its outer edge, and now humans claimed they'd sent a fleet there? They're insane, Thrym muttered, her voice a mix of astonishment and mockery. Who do they think they are, attacking Nuruth with what? A handful of supply ships? Kale didn't reply. He turned to Lyra, who stared at the blank screen, her pale purple eyes glinting with curiosity. What do you think? He asked. Lyra shook her head slowly. I don't know, General, but if they dare make such a claim, they must have something we haven't seen. Humans aren't a race that acts recklessly. They've watched us for too long. Watched? Kale murmured, his unease growing. He ordered the communications officer, connect to the observation post near Nuruth. I want to see what's happening. The hologram screen flared to life again, this time showing a distant view of the Nuruth system. Vyran's massive warships hung in space, their lava-red hulls gleaming, their plasma cannons flickering, ready to fire. Then, from the screen's edge, something emerged. It was the human fleet. Kale squinted, trying to make sense of what he saw. No towering warships or grandiose formations like those of Vyran or the Concord. The human fleet was tiny, almost laughable, a lone command ship, a few compact destroyers, and a cluster of fragile escorts. Compared to Vyran's hundreds of vessels, they looked like insects facing a beast. Thrym let out a dry laugh. This is the force they sent to Nuruth? Are they trying to die? But Kale didn't laugh. Something about how the human fleet moved sent a shiver through him. They weren't scattered or chaotic like Concord fleets often were. Every ship glided in sync, like a living organism, forming a formation so tight it seemed seamless. Zoom in, he commanded, his voice sharp. The screen magnified, and Kale noticed something even stranger. The human ships bore no massive cannons or thick armor like Vyran's. They were sleek, streamlined, almost weaponless on the surface. What are they planning with that? Thrym muttered, her mockery now tinged with doubt. And then it began. From the human command ship, an invisible wave rippled through space. No dazzling light or thunderous blast, just an eerie stillness. But instantly Vyran warships faltered. Lights on their hulls flickered chaotically, plasma cannons went dark, and their tight formation shattered as if torn apart by an unseen hand. Report, Kale shouted, turning to the communications officer. General, the officer replied, his voice trembling as he scanned the data screen. Observation posts detect a massive electromagnetic pulse from the human fleet. Vyran's control systems, they're completely disabled. Kale's heart raced. On the screen, the tiny human ships surged forward, diving into Vyran's chaotic ranks with terrifying speed and precision. No deafening barrages or sky-shattering explosions like the Concord's usual tactics. Instead, they unleashed high-speed kinetic rounds, striking weak points, reactors, control rooms, engines. Every shot hit its mark, as if they knew exactly where to aim. Within minutes, dozens of Vyran warships turned into lifeless hulks, drifting in space like corpses. Thrym's jaw dropped, her large eyes widening until they nearly glowed. How did they do that? Kale didn't answer. He turned to Lyra, who was frantically scribbling on her personal device. Can you explain? He asked, his voice now a mix of awe and worry. Lyra looked up, her pale purple eyes flashing with an odd light. This is electronic warfare on a level I've never seen. They didn't just blind Vyran systems, they hacked them, shutting everything down remotely. And those attacks, they're too precise, like they've studied Vyran for years. Years, Kale echoed, his unease morphing into a vague fear. He turned back to the screen, where the human fleet pressed deeper into Narath, unflinching and scathed. Vyran fired back, but their cannons missed, their radar clearly crippled. A massive Vyran warship, perhaps a command vessel, tried to turn and flee, but a human destroyer darted in, unleashing a salvo through its reactor. The explosion lit up space, and Kale felt a chill run down his spine. "This isn't fighting," he whispered, almost to himself. "This is a hunt." The command room of the Galactic Concord Central Station grew stifling, filled only with the soft hiss of ventilation and the officers' ragged breaths. On the holographic screen, the Narath system, Vyran's impregnable stronghold, was descending into chaos. Vyran's colossal warships, their lava-red hulls and gleaming plasma cannons, once symbols of terror, now staggered like wounded beasts, helpless in space. The human fleet, absurdly small, wove through them like phantoms, every move chillingly precise. General Kale Vorin stood frozen, his emerald eyes glued to the screen. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Just minutes ago, he dismissed the humans' declaration of war as a jest, a suicidal act from a race untested in true combat. But now, as their sleek ships sliced through Vyran's ranks like a blade through flesh, a cold dread gripped him. This wasn't the war he knew. No thunderous barrages, no hours-long clashes of massive fleets. This was something else entirely, something unnatural. "Zoom in on the eastern sector," Kale ordered, his voice cutting like a sword. The communications officer hurriedly adjusted the screen, revealing a clearer view of a group of human destroyers. They were far smaller than any Concord or Vyran warship, their glossy hulls free of thick armor or visible cannons. But their speed, too fast to track with the naked eye, left Kale breathless. One destroyer shot into the gap between two Vyran warships, firing a salvo of small, sharp kinetic rounds. The projectiles didn't trigger massive explosions. They pierced the Vyran hulls, targeting weak points. Engines, control rooms, power systems. In an instant, one warship flared briefly with flame before going dark, drifting aimlessly like a metal corpse. Admiral Thrime, beside Kale, muttered in disbelief. No plasma cannons, no nuclear missiles. How can they inflict such damage with those things? The fins along her spine quivered fiercely, mirroring the confusion in her mind. A seasoned Korani warrior who'd seen hundreds of battles, Thrime understood war as a contest of might. Bigger fleets, stronger weapons, unyielding resolve. But the humans seemed to defy those rules. Kale turned to Lyra Vey, still scribbling furiously on her device. "Lyra, explain," he said, his tone now urgent. "What are they doing to Vyran's fleet?" Lyra looked up, her pale purple eyes glinting with a strange excitement, as if she'd uncovered a cosmic riddle. "It's a blend of electronic warfare and precision strikes," she replied, her fingers swiping the screen to display a data chart. The initial electromagnetic pulse didn't just blind Vyran. It paralyzed their entire control systems. Radar, communications, weapons, all useless. Then they used high-speed kinetic weapons not to destroy the ships outright, but to disable critical components. They know exactly where Vyran's weaknesses lie, as if they've studied them for ages. Ages, Kale repeated, his voice dropping. He glanced back at the screen, where a human escort ship dodged a desperate plasma barrage from a Vyran warship. The shots veered miles off course, and before the Vyran vessel could adjust, the escort lunged, firing rounds through its engine bay. A small explosion erupted, enough to halt the massive ship, leaving it adrift in space. Thrime shook her head, her large eyes nearly glowing with shock. "Impossible. We've fought Vyran for decades, losing thousands of ships just to slow them down. And they do this in minutes." Kale didn't respond immediately. A growing unease chilled him, like ice seeping through his metallic skin. He'd heard rumors about humans, tales from space traders of a race born on a death world, where survival meant constant battle against nature and themselves. He'd dismissed them as exaggerations, stories to scare children. Now, watching their tiny fleet tear through Vyran's defenses with near impossible ease, he wondered if those rumors held truth, and if so, what humans truly were. On the screen, the human command ship, slightly larger than its companions but still dwarfed by Vyran standards, emitted another invisible wave. This time, Kale saw the effect instantly. Dozens of Vyran warships stopped dead, their hull lights blinking out. An officer shouted from the corner, "General! Observation posts report Vyran's communication systems are completely severed. They can't coordinate a counterattack." Kale clenched his fists, his claws scraping the chair's edge. "They're blinding their enemy?" he whispered, almost to himself. "Not just blinding, they're stripping away every sense Vyran has." Lyra nodded, her voice tinged with awe and worry. "Exactly. And when the enemy can't see, hear, or react, they become prey." She paused, meeting Kale's gaze with meaning. "This isn't random tactics. They've planned this." Before Kale could reply, the hologram screen trembled as a new signal appeared. It was Colonel Elias Hart, the man from the initial message. His cold face and sharp gray eyes swept the room as if he could see them all. "Galactic Concord," his voice boomed, deep and emotionless. "We've neutralized the eastern defenses of Narath. Vyran's fleet can no longer coordinate. We request you hold your position and refrain from interference. This is our matter now." The image faded, leaving a thick silence. Thrym turned to Kale, her voice a mix of anger and confusion. "Refrain from interference? Who do they think they are, ordering us around? We've bled for decades to keep this galaxy standing." Kale didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen, where the human fleet pressed deeper into Narath, relentless, untouched. A massive Vyran warship, likely a regional command vessel, tried to retreat, but two human destroyers flanked it, firing into its reactor. The blast illuminated space, and Kale's heart thudded. This wasn't a battle, it was a controlled slaughter. "They don't fight like us," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "We hurl fleets at Vyran, hoping brute force prevails. They dissect their enemy, cut by cut." Thrym frowned, her fins quivering violently. "What do you mean?" Kale turned to her, his emerald eyes flashing oddly. "I mean, they're not here to help us win this war. They're here to end it their way. And I'm not sure if we should rejoice or fear that." On the screen, the human fleet advanced, unhesitating, merciless. And in Kale's heart, a question took root. One he dared not voice. If humans could do this to Vyran, what would they do to us when it was over? Space around the Narath system now resembled a cosmic graveyard, where Vyran's colossal warships floated lifeless, shattered, or burning silently. Small explosion flares blinked out, leaving metal shards glinting like stardust in the endless dark. General Kale Voran stood in the command room of the Galactic Concord's central station, his emerald eyes reflecting the chaos on the holographic screen. In less than an hour, the human fleet, small, unassuming, and seemingly frail, had reduced the Vyran Empire's mightiest stronghold to ruins. Kale gripped the chair's edge, his claws leaving faint scratches on the metal. He couldn't tear his eyes from the screen, where human ships moved with near-supernatural precision. A destroyer darted through a debris cloud, evading a weak plasma volley from a struggling Vyran warship. Before the enemy could fire again, the destroyer retaliated with kinetic rounds, piercing the engine bay. A brief explosion flared, and the giant vessel went dark, joining the ranks of the defeated. Admiral Thrym stood beside Kale, her spine fins trembling fiercely, reflecting her inner turmoil. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice a blend of awe and fear. "We lost thousands of ships just holding Vyran at Narath. And they do this like it's a game." Her large eyes widened, mirroring the screen's light, now tinged with growing unease rather than curiosity. Kale turned to Lyra Vey, her small hands racing over the data screen at the auxiliary console. "Lyra," he called, his voice deep and pressing. "What do you see? What are they doing out there?" Lyra looked up, her pale purple eyes glinting with excitement and unease. "They're not just attacking in space," she replied, her words measured. "They've extended the campaign to the ground. Look here." She waved her hand, and the hologram shifted to a new view, the surface of Narath Prime. the system's central planet. Vyran's fortified bastions, shielded by thick energy barriers and anti-ship cannons, smoldered. Compact machines, likely human landing craft, moved among the defenses, firing thin, sharp beams that disabled each cannon with terrifying accuracy. Kale squinted, struggling to comprehend. "They've reached the surface?" he asked, his tone laced with shock. "How? We couldn't even breach Narath Prime's shields." Lyra nodded, pointing to a data stream on the screen. "They didn't breach the shields, they shut them down." The initial electromagnetic pulse didn't just target Vyran's fleet in space. It pierced the atmosphere, crippling planetary defenses. Then they deployed ground units, not large armies, but small, mobile teams trained to hit key targets. "Look, they've taken 3 Vyran command centers in 20 minutes. Thryme's jaw dropped, her fins quivering as if caught in a gust. "Taken command centers? With what? They did that how?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. She zoomed in on a human landing team, small figures in dark armor, moving swiftly through a Vyran fortress's ruins. They carried no heavy weapons, no tanks, no artillery. Instead, each held a compact device emitting thin beams aimed at the fortress's control nodes. In a flash, Vyran's automated defenses went offline, and the team advanced deeper, unwavering. "They don't destroy," Lyra said, her voice a mix of awe and dread. "They restructure the enemy. They don't need brute force, they target weaknesses, disable systems one by one, then seize them. This isn't war as we know it." Kale's heart pounded. He glanced back at the screen, where the human fleet in space pressed on, now past Narath's eastern defenses and heading for the system's core. A massive Vyran warship, perhaps a regional flagship, tried to flee, but 2 human destroyers flanked it, firing into its reactor. The blast lit up space, and Kale felt a chill down his spine. "They give the enemy no chance," he whispered, almost to himself. "No retreat, no surrender, just annihilation." Meanwhile, thousands of light miles away, aboard the Vyran command warship Dreadspire, General Vyran Zorath roared in fury. His tattered wings beat fiercely, shaking the air in the vast chamber. His golden eyes locked on the tactical screen, where his once invincible fleet crumbled like sand in the wind. "What is happening?" he snarled, his voice echoing across the bridge, making Vyran officers shrink in fear. "Who dares do this to us?" An officer, his crimson skin trembling, stepped forward, head bowed low. "General, it's the humans, a race from the Concord. They appeared from nowhere, disabling our systems with electromagnetic pulses. The Eastern fleets lost contact, and Narath Prime reports ground defenses collapsing." Zorath slammed his fist on the console, cracking the metal surface. "Humans?" he bellowed, his voice a mix of scorn and confusion. "Those weaklings who only send food and supplies? They have no fleet, no army. How dare they challenge Vyran?" The officer swallowed, his voice quaking. They don't fight like us, sir. They don't use raw power. They strike precisely, swiftly, and they know our every weakness." Zorath turned back to the screen, where a human destroyer felled another of his warships. Rage surged within him, but beneath it lurked a fear he wouldn't admit. He'd conquered dozens of systems, crushing foes with Vyran's overwhelming might. Yet now, facing these tiny ships, he felt hunted, not by an equal, but by a predator that knew how to kill without effort. "Order the fleet to counterattack," Zorath shouted, his wings beating harder. "Focus all firepower on their command ship. I want them reduced to ash." The officers scrambled to obey, but Kale and the Concord, watching from afar, saw the outcome before it unfolded. On the hologram, a cluster of Vyran warships rallied, aiming plasma cannons at the human command ship, the largest in their modest fleet. But before the cannons could fire, another invisible wave pulsed from the human vessel. Vyran targeting systems flickered and died, their plasma shots veering miles off course. In an instant, 3 human destroyers darted in, firing in unison, turning the Vyran ships into useless hulks. Thryme stepped back, her large eyes glowing with shock. "Impossible," she whispered. They anticipated Vyran's counterattack? Lyra nodded, her voice low. They didn't just anticipate, they manipulated. Every Vyran move was in their calculations. This isn't random combat. It's a meticulously prepared plan. Kale's heart raced. He stared at the screen, where the human fleet advanced into Nuruth's heart, relentless, unscathed. A question formed in his mind, one he dared not voice. If humans could do this to Vyran, what had they prepared for the rest of the galaxy? Aboard the Dreadspire, Zorith roared in desperation. "Retreat!" he bellowed, his voice now tinged with panic. "Pull the fleet back to the western stronghold. We'll regroup and crush them." But as he turned to the screen, a horrific truth dawned. The humans weren't just winning. They were herding him into a trap he couldn't escape. Space around Nuruth was now a tapestry of chaos and stillness. Vyran warship fragments floated like dead stars, while the human fleet moved with cold precision, never slowing. In the Galactic Concord's Central Station command room, General Kale Voran stood motionless, his emerald eyes fixed on the holographic screen. In mere hours, humans had achieved what the Concord couldn't in over a decade, driving the Vyran Empire to the brink of collapse. Yet the victory's joy eluded him. Instead, a deep unease rose within, like a cold wind across his metallic skin. Admiral Thrime, beside him, muttered in awe, "They don't stop. No losses, no hesitation. This isn't war, it's a machine." Her spine fins quivered fiercely, her inability to hide her confusion evident. On the screen, a human destroyer team disabled Vyran's last space fortress at Nuruth Prime, their kinetic rounds piercing the energy reactor. A small blast collapsed the structure, and Kale's heart thudded. Before he could speak, a new signal buzzed in the room. The communications officer turned, voice trembling. "General, the humans are sending a direct transmission. It's Colonel Elias Hart." Kale nodded, ordering, "Activate it." The hologram flickered, and Elias Hart appeared in the room's center. The middle-aged man with gray-streaked brown hair and icy gray eyes stared at them, his face emotionless yet radiating an aura that silenced everyone. "Galactic Concord." Elias's voice rang out, deep and clear. "Nuruth is under control. Vyran's fleet can no longer resist. We've sent a surrender demand to their command ship, Dreadspire. They have 10 minutes to respond. If not, we'll proceed with the final phase, total neutralization." He paused, his eyes scanning the room as if assessing each occupant. "We don't kill for pleasure. We do this to ensure no one rises again." The image faded, leaving a heavy silence. Thrime turned to Kale, her voice a mix of anger and confusion. "No one rises again? What does he mean? Who are they to decide the galaxy's fate?" Kale didn't reply immediately. He looked to Lyra Vey, quietly studying data at the console, her pale purple eyes intent. "Lyra," he called, his voice low. "What do you make of what he said?" Lyra looked up, her small face unusually grave. "They don't just want to win," she replied, her words deliberate. "They want to reshape how the galaxy works. This isn't a typical victory, they're sending a message. A message that anyone who challenges them will be erased." A chill ran down Kale's spine. He stepped closer to the hologram, where Nuruth's image showed the human fleet encircling Dreadspire, Vyran's last command ship. Their tiny vessels formed a perfect ring, not attacking, just waiting. "Are they saviors or oppressors?" he whispered, almost to himself. Thrime frowned, her fins trembling violently. "Saviors? They just wiped out a fleet we couldn't touch in 10 years. We should thank them, Kale. Why do you doubt them?" Kale turned to her, his emerald eyes glinting strangely. "Because I'm not sure they did this for us," he replied, his voice low and slow. "They've watched us for decades, Thrime. They know Vyran's every weakness and maybe ours too. If they can do this to Vyran, who'll stop them from doing it to the Concord when the time comes?" Lyra stepped forward, her voice tinged with worry. "I agree with General Kale. Look at how they fight. No waste, no mercy, no emotion. They don't destroy out of necessity. They restructure the enemy for their own ends. What's the cost of their peace? And who'll pay it?" Before Thrym could argue, the hologram trembled again. This time, it showed the Dreadspire's bridge. General Vyran Zorith appeared, his tattered wings beating fiercely, his golden eyes blazing with rage and fear. He stood amid a chaotic bridge. Vyran officers darted about, control screens flashing red with failure. "Humans!" Zorith roared, his voice echoing through space. "You think you can subdue Vyran with this trickery? This isn't victory. It's cowardice." Elias Hart appeared on a small opposing screen, his face stone-cold. "We need no trickery," he replied, his calm voice chilling. "You lost because you relied on brute force, outdated doctrines from centuries past. We offered you surrender long ago, through messages you ignored. Now you pay for that arrogance." Zorith slammed his fist on the console, widening a crack in the metal. "Surrender?" he snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "Vyran doesn't surrender. We'll fight to the last, and your blood will stain this galaxy red." Elias tilted his head, his gray eyes unwavering. "If that's your choice, we'll end it swiftly. But know this, we're not here to bathe in blood. We're here to stop conflict. Fully, decisively, so no one else has to die." Kale's heart raced at those words. He turned to Lyra, whispering, "Is he serious? Do they really want peace? Or is this just an excuse?" Lyra shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "Their peace is the silence of the defeated. They don't kill from hatred, but they don't stop for compassion. It's an equation, and we're just variables." On Dreadspire's bridge, Zorith turned to his officers. His crimson face glistened with sweat, his golden eyes dimming as reality crashed in. An officer approached, voice shaking. "General, there's no way out. The fleet's surrounded, ground defenses are gone. If we don't surrender, they'll erase us in minutes." Zorith roared, but the sound was weaker, like a wounded beast's groan. He glanced at the screen, where Elias Hart stood motionless, waiting. For a moment, his wings stilled, and the arrogance that defined him melted away. "Fine," he whispered, his voice a hoarse rasp. "We surrender. But don't think this is over, human. You'll pay for this insolence." Elias nodded, his face unchanged. "Order your fleet to stand down. We'll ensure your lives are spared, but only if you comply." His image vanished, and on the hologram, Kale saw the human fleet ease its encirclement, though still poised to act if Vyran reneged. The Concord command room fell silent. Thrym stepped back, her large eyes wide with shock. "They did it," she whispered. "They forced Zorith to surrender. I can't believe it." Kale didn't reply. He approached the screen, staring at Dreadspire, now still in space. A strange feeling stirred within him. Not joy, not relief, but a vague fear. He turned to Lyra, his voice low. "You're right. This isn't victory, it's control. And I'm not sure if we're their allies or just pieces in a larger game." Lyra nodded, her pale purple eyes fixed on the screen. "Their peace comes at a cost," she said, her voice soft but sharp. "The question is, who'll pay it? Vyran today or us tomorrow?" On the screen, the human fleet shifted, not to attack but to stabilize Narath. Yet in Kale's heart, a greater question lingered. What did humans truly want? And what would become of this galaxy when they got it? The Narath system now lay eerily still. Vyran's colossal warships, once icons of invincible power, drifted lifeless in space, shattered or fully disabled. The human fleet, small yet fearsome, ceased its assault. Instead, they moved with cold precision, deploying transports and technical units to claim what remained of Vyran's stronghold. Aboard Dreadspire, General Vyran Zorith stood silently, his tattered wings drooping, his once fiery golden eyes dulled by defeat. He no longer roared or threatened. Humanity had choked his pride, leaving only a reluctant survivor. In the Galactic Concord's Central Station command room, General Kale Vorin gazed at the holographic screen, his emerald eyes reflecting the strange scene. Narath had fallen to humans in mere hours, a triumph the Concord hadn't dared dream of after decades of bloodshed. Yet the joy he'd expected never came. Instead, A deep unease gnawed at him, a shadow creeping through his metallic skin. He turned to Admiral Thrime, beside him, her spine fins now quivering faintly, though her large eyes still gleamed with confusion. "They did it," Thrime said, her voice small but clear. "Vyran surrendered. A war we thought would drag on for another century ended in a day." She paused, studying Kale. "Why aren't you pleased, Kale? This is what we fought for." Kale didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer to the screen, watching human ships navigate Narath Prime's ruins. They no longer destroyed, instead they rebuilt. Technical teams in dark armor landed on the planet, seizing Vyran fortresses, repairing power systems, and setting up new checkpoints. This wasn't the work of bloodthirsty conquerors. It was calculated control, a plan long in the making. "They're not here to save us," he finally said, his voice low and deliberate. "They're here to reshape the galaxy. Their way." Before Thrime could reply, Lyra Vey approached, her small hands clutching her data device. Her pale purple eyes locked on Kale, her voice sharp yet soft. "I've analyzed their campaign data," she said. "Everything electromagnetic pulses, precision strikes, space-ground coordination was planned with unbelievable detail. They didn't just prepare for Vyran. They prepared for any enemy, any scenario. This isn't random war. It's a test." Kale's heart quickened. "A test?" he echoed, his voice dropping. "What do you mean?" Lyra met his gaze, her small face unusually stern. "They didn't just want to defeat Vyran. They wanted to prove they can control this galaxy. Their peace isn't a gift to us. It's a warning to anyone who defy them. And I fear we're in that warning's scope too." The room fell silent. Thrime stepped back, her large eyes wide with shock. "You're saying they'll turn on us? After all they've done?" Lyra shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "Not now. But if we, or anyone, threaten the order they aim to build, they won't hesitate. They don't kill from spite, but they don't stop for mercy. They're architects, Kale, and this galaxy is their blueprint." A chill coursed through Kale. He turned back to the screen, where the human fleet had finished stabilizing Narath. Their transports moved between planets, carrying equipment and personnel to rebuild what Vyran left behind. But in that fearsome efficiency, he saw something beyond victory. A vision, a plan he couldn't fully grasp. He whispered, almost to himself, "What have they prepared for that we haven't seen?" Before anyone could answer, a new signal buzzed in the room. The communications officer turned, voice trembling. "General, Colonel Elias Hart requests a face-to-face meeting. He's en route to our station." Kale narrowed his eyes, his unease turning to faint dread. "Let him in," he ordered, his voice sharp as a blade. Minutes later, the command room doors slid open, and Elias Hart stepped inside. He wore a plain dark uniform, his gray eyes sweeping the room as if evaluating each person. He stopped in the center, standing tall, devoid of arrogance yet radiating an aura that hushed the room. "Galactic Concord," he said, his voice deep and clear. "The war with Vyran is over. Narath is under our control. We'll begin reconstruction and ensure this empire never rises again." Kale stepped forward, his emerald eyes locking onto Elias. "Why?" he asked, his voice low but cutting. "Why did you do this? You watched us for decades, then stepped in and ended it in a day. What's your real purpose?" Elias tilted his head, his gray eyes steady. "Our purpose is peace," he replied, his calm voice chilling. "But not the fragile peace you've struggled to maintain. We come from a world where conflict is life's essence. We learn to adapt, to end threats before they spread. This galaxy needs order, and we'll bring it." Lyra stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. "At what cost? You forced Vyran to surrender, but who's next if they don't fit your blueprint?" Elias turned to her, a faint, strange glint in his gray eyes. Not anger, but cold certainty. "We don't want a next," he said. "We fight to ensure there isn't one. But if someone threatens this order, we'll act. Swiftly, decisively, without compromise." Kale's heart raced. He stepped closer to Elias, his voice lowering. And us? The Concord is your ally today. But tomorrow? If we reject your order, will we be the next Vyran? Elias met his gaze, his face unchanged. Your allies as long as you seek peace, he replied. We don't seek enemies, but we're always ready for them. He paused, then turned to leave. Rest, General Kale. The war's over. What comes next is up to you. As Elias exited, a cold wave enveloped Kale. He turned to the hologram where the galactic map now showed Narath under human control. They hadn't just defeated Vyran, they'd shifted the galaxy's power balance. But in that stillness, he heard a faint sound. A weak, strange signal from the galaxy's distant edge. Communications officer, Kale ordered, his voice sharp. Analyze that signal. The officer hurried to comply, then turned back, face pale. General, it's not from Vyran or any Concord race. It's from an unexplored region. The data shows a complex encoded signal, maybe a message or a warning. Kale stared at the screen, where the odd signal blinked like a new star. A vague fear rose within, not of Vyran, not of humans, but of something bigger, farther. He whispered, almost to himself, what have they prepared for that we haven't seen? Aboard a human command ship thousands of light miles away, Elias Hart stood before a private screen, eyeing the same signal. A cold smile flickered across his face. Not joy, but certainty. We're always ready, he murmured, then turned away, leaving the darkness and unanswered questions hanging in the vast void. The galaxy had entered a new era, one of peace, but also of mysteries yet unveiled. And Kale knew, whether humans were saviors or architects of a new order, this story wasn't truly over.